Alter said his whole yeshiva in Slobodka was kedai to produce one of Avraham Eliyahu Kaplan. He's unknown because he died suddenly, very unexpectedly, and he was 34 years old. Put it in perspective, he was a year older than Rav Kaplan and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. So that means he's their generation. So he could have been in our world had he lived longer. He wasn't someone from a long time ago. He died in 1923. He was 34, 1889, 1923, and he was the shining light of Slobodka, a unique neshama, unique. He would say Gramen by his friend's Sheva Brachas, and it was all Aaron Cutler's Sheva Brachas.
Aaron Cutler's Sheva Brachas. Aaron gave a long pilpul, after which he turned it into a Gramen, saying the entire thing back in Gramen. And famously, a bunch of Talmidim Ner Yisrael were casting doubt, as Litvaks tend to do, about the veracity of this story. And they asked him, and all of a sudden Rebbetzin Ruderman, the daughter of Sheftel Kramer, says it's a true story, and she was there because she was at the wedding, and she heard this actually happen.
Avraham Eliyahu Kaplan was in his 34 years on this world. He wrote Sfarim, he gave Shiurim, he wrote articles to all the Torah journals, he wrote poetry, he was hired as a Rav and a Rosh Yeshiva, and then he was made a Rosh Yeshiva here in the Rabbinical Seminary in Berlin. The Sridei Age, Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg, succeeded him. So he came to take over, another Slobodka import. He was this rising star in all fields. In the world of Kabbalah, he was already becoming someone well known in Kabbalah. In the world of Torah, in Psak, in Lumdis, he was already world renowned. In Musar, in Hanhaga, in leadership, and surprisingly, I had read about it a few times, that he was becoming known in the Berlin circles as this brilliant mind who was a Slobodker like Rabbi Yaakov Weinberg and other Slobodkers too, who was willing to engage with the scholarly world and was willing to engage with the Jewish studies, and he, in a frum way, it wasn't a maskil or anything, right? But he was willing to engage with that world and that society. And so I had read about it once, and recently I was in a library, and you know what happens when you're in an academic library? You get like kind of overwhelmed, like you're a little kid in a candy store and can't choose what to take off the shelf. And I noticed a Pinkus Kehilos Lita from the Vad Ha'arba Aratzis, which, if you're interested in reading that book, you should probably be institutionalized. So I immediately grabbed the book off the shelf. I was fascinated by it, and it was edited from its original. It had never been published. It was in an archive. It was edited from its original in the early 1920s in Berlin by the famous Jewish historian Shimon Dubnov, probably the most famous Jewish historian in the world in history, and he since Josephus, and Dubnov. So I'm flipping through it, and I see Dubnov's introduction to the book. So I read through the introduction because he explains how he found it and how he came to publish it. And at the last paragraph, he says, I want to mention Matzevas Zikaron over here. Now, Dubnov was not just secular; he was almost militantly secular. He was very, very secular. He did not, And he says there's this young, brilliant Chacham Talmudi named Avraham Eliyahu Kaplan from the Rabbinical Seminary in Berlin, who came from Slobodka, and he helped me with editing this Pinkus Kehilos Lita, and he was this brilliant Talmud Chacham, but at the same time he was so scientific, and so he said he became indispensable to my working for the secular historian. And unfortunately, tragically, before this book was even published, he suddenly died when he was 34 years old. So I was like amazed by that Shimon Dubnov, who is like the most opposite of the yeshiva world that's possible, is coming, like being maspid, the brilliant Avraham Eliyahu Kaplan. And then the Mekubalim come along, and they recently they started discovering his Shaka Chama, his famous song, which we'll hear more about Dovi and our singer, and also a little bit more about Avraham Eliyahu Kaplan.
On that note, the latest edition of Chakira Journal printed one of his Hispedim. This is a gutsy move, obviously. Somebody who's coming from the yeshiva world, someone who was head of the Hildesheimer Seminary. First of all, we're coming up on his 100th Yahrzeit very shortly. He died in 1924. But in 1919, he gave Hesped for Theodore Herzl, and the Hesped was titled Ivri Anochi. And I'll just give you a small glimpse into what he said. In 1919, he eulogized Herzl with the following words: "He did not teach us the Torah of Moshe. He didn't teach us Halacha and Agadah. He did not teach us Jewish wisdom and Musar, for he was never taught them. He taught us two words, which until he arrived, we did not dare and could not speak. Ivri Anochi, I am a Jew.